Welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Ben Anderson, and we are here with our second edition of the CBB Review Rank from 100 to 1. We are counting down. We are doing 5 at a time here on the podcast, and today we are going to do teams 95 through 91. Let's start with team 95, which is who, Ben?
The James Madison Dukes. Very interesting team here. You're going to see a couple familiar names, right? TJ Bickerstaff. Who would have thought, right? That's a name. That's a name that if you're an ACC fan, you should be familiar with. Very interesting team. Finished 4th in the Sun Belt in their first year in the league here. And it has potential to go higher. I really like what they bring back, and they have a couple of interesting pieces. But the biggest concern for me, I'm going to start there, is the point guard position. If you look at their roster, you have Michael Green III coming in from Robert Morris, but really there's not a ton behind it. And I'm interested to see what running that offense looks like for the Dukes.
Yeah, that's definitely the concern for me. I'm pretty excited, though, overall about this JMU team. The 22 games that they won last year was a program record, and they've kind of been unlucky, although some of it is their own doing, to not make the tournament in the past couple of years. I mean, 2 years ago, they won their conference, but they were ineligible because they went to join the Sun Belt from the CAA. And then last year, this was their own doing, but despite winning 22 games, they were upset by South Alabama in the conference tournament. But this is the year they could be tournament bound. We project them second in the Sun Belt Conference. And you talked about the deficiencies in the point guard position. Well, you wrote it on the slide. At the shooting guard position, Terrence Edwards will really lead the way, and he led the team in scoring last year, actually off the bench, 13.3 points per game. And him and Julian Wooden are the two guys I'm looking at. Actually, he didn't write down Wooden, but he returns Wooden as a 6'8" versatile wing. So a guy you did not write down, but that's a guy I'm definitely looking at as well.
Absolutely. And as you can see, JMU is not a power by any means in the basketball landscape. They haven't made the tournament since 2013, but in a conference that's arguably a little bit easier than the Colonial Athletic Conference. I feel like you could say that. Oh, sorry, Coastal Athletic Conference. You see that name change?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Coastal Athletic Conference. New one. That's interesting. I do think they have the strength to compete against all of the Sun Belt teams. And like you said, Edwards, once he gets a starting role, he might lead the way here for the Dukes.
One thing, Matt Waldman, who is the writer of the article about JMU, which, by the way, check the episode description. There are links to each of the articles from 95 to 91 that we wrote more in-depth team profiles on here at CBB Review. But Matt Waldman wrote the JMU one. He pointed out that their free throw shooting was super poor last year. They were barely above 70% as a team, and that is also a team that went to the line a lot. So I talked about the South Alabama upset. They went 14 for 22 from the line in that upset. That could have been the difference right there. My question here, and I guess we could close out the JMU segment with this. Do they have someone they could lean on? Somebody that could take over a game if things go south, and like, let's say we're in the same situation as last year. We're in the semifinals of the conference tournament, and JMU has had a really good season, but not good enough to get an at-large bid. They must win this game, and they need a big bucket down the stretch. Do they have somebody that could do that? Is Edwards that guy?
I think you'd hope it'd be Edwards, but it's also hard to rely on a bench player last year, albeit he was the 6th man of the year in the Sun Belt Conference, but he was still a bench player. So to be able to see that in the early season, I think is going to be really important for the Dukes to succeed in the long run.
All right, well, you ready to move on to 94?
Let's do it. Who do we have, Dan?
We have the Ohio Bobcats, a team Ben and I are unfortunately pretty familiar with. They have been a quality program under Jeff Bowles, of course. Like I just alluded to, they had that tournament win over the University of Virginia back in 2021, and then they went back to the 2022 season with 25 wins, and then last year was kind of a slight fall off. They lost to we talked about this team on the last episode. That is the Toledo Rockets. Last year in the MAC tournament did not make the NCAA tournament, but this year they return 4 of their 5 starters. What's the outlook on the Bobcats?
So, yes, they return 4 of their 5 starters, but they also lose their leading scorer and rebounder from last year in Dwight Wilson, right? And that is of especially big concern to me, given their lack of depth in the front court. That's why I put Gabe Wisnitzer on the list here of key players, because although he only averaged 3 and 3, he is their center, and they don't have a lot of depth behind him. So I'm really interested to see what that front court looks like, because they do have small guards as well. They're projected starting backcourt is made up of a 5'11" Jalen Hunter and a 6'1" Miles Brown. So are they now? This is a lower level of basketball. It's not like they're going against Kentucky with this lineup, but will they still be able to compete against some of the larger teams in the MAC?
Yeah, I mean, we do project them first in the MAC, actually, just in front of Toledo. That is definitely a concern right there. But Elmore James is one of the 3 double-digit scorers that do return. I think he is primed for a breakout sophomore season. He had a pretty solid freshman season. Looking back, I don't think he was double digits, but I certainly think he will be this coming year. They added a couple guys moving down from power conference teams to get more playing time, including Sharif Mitchell from Creighton and Ike Cornish from Maryland. And I think this team is deep. The question is, do they have a superstar? And it's kind of a similar situation to what we just talked about with James Madison. Do they have a superstar that will really put them over the top? But I think there's more candidates with this Ohio team. There's James, there's Jalen Hunter, who is part of that under 6 foot club. He averaged over 13 points per game last year. So, like I said, we project them first in the MAC for a reason. I'm pretty excited about this Ohio team.
I am as well. And for what it's worth, my breakout candidate is definitely AJ Brown. He had a very solid freshman season, actually got some looks from NBA scouts. They were really interested in his size and versatility on the wing. So if you're looking for maybe a Ben Shepherd type, right, to sort of shoot up the draft boards from a lower level, AJ Brown might be your guy.
All right. Anything else on Ohio?
That is all I have. Who do we have at 93, Dan?
We have Butler, who I think, we have it in the episode title, maybe projecting, the trajectory is headed back towards their old ways. We have them at 93 for a reason. They are not anywhere close to the Butler in like the mid 2010s where they kept making the tournament. They kept even winning games going the second weekend. That's not going to be close to what Butler is this year, but I think they will improve upon Thad Matta's first year, in which they won only 14 games, and that has been quite common for Butler in the recent couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest story here has to be the transfers. I mean, if you look up and down the roster, Posh Alexander, right, projected starting guard, transfer from St. John's. DJ Davis, transfer from UC Irvine. Jamil Telford, Northeastern. Andre Screen, Bucknell. Pierre Brooks is from Michigan State. Landon Moore coming in from St. Francis, Pennsylvania. Like, they do not have returners really outside of Jalen Thomas and maybe Connor Turnbull. This is going to be a test for Thad Matta to make sure that he can create a cohesive team here. And I'm really interested to see how he's able to do that.
Yeah, and that's why I think teams like Butler and really a lot of teams this coming year and in the last couple of years, but these are the teams that you maybe project them to not win too many games early on, or at least fall off, perform a little bit below the Vegas expectation. And then it kind of like regression to the mean happens, and they maybe towards the latter stages of the season start winning a little more than their expectation. But with Butler, yeah, it's just Jalen Thomas, the super senior. The rest will be transfers. And one guy I want to talk a little bit more about is Posh Alexander, because he was a very good two-way player at St. John's, a double-digit scorer at a Big East school. So you got that going for you. And they also got a lot of guys from the mid-major level. So like you said, Davis from UC Irvine, I think that's my favorite one, actually. Can the production translate? A lot of the problem was for for Butler last year. They were just out muscled on the boards, and around the rim they were just not good. So I think Mata definitely approached that problem in the transfer portal and got acquisitions that are a little more bulky and have a little more muscle on them. So I think that's going to be key. But we projected the Butler Bulldogs at 10th in the Big East.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. The Big East is just such a competitive league this year that it's hard to find those wins. I mean, even teams like DePaul are improved right now, and arguably St. John's as well with Rick Pitino coming in, right? All of a sudden, who is like if you look around and you don't see the little guy, does that mean you're the little guy, right? And I think that even if Butler is improved this year, they might find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, and to close off the Butler segment, I like that fact that you put out. The last time he was at his second season at school, he won the Big Ten at Ohio State. So
for sure. Yeah, I mean, he's got the coaching chops. We'll see what he can do with the Bulldogs. Dan, who do we have at 92?
92, we have UCF, who is now in the Big 12. Now, albeit it's for football reasons, not really for basketball reasons, and they're not really projected as nearly as good as some of the Big 12 teams of last year. That's why we have them 92 on the list. In fact, we project them 13th in next year's Big 12. But there's a couple redeeming qualities of this team. First off, they have a ton of experience, a lot of juniors, seniors, super seniors. Some of the guys came from JUCO, so they don't have all the Division I experience in the world, but guys have been playing basketball at the collegiate level for several years. And, you know, they went 19-15 in the AAC last year, but an early season game against Miami, I think that could really, a rivalry game, could really prove themselves. Not necessarily winning the game, but it'll be a good litmus test to see if they could keep it close and be competitive.
Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the story of this year's UCF team is going to be told around the schedule, right? They're moving into the best basketball conference in the country. And if you are finishing, 19-15, like you said, in the AAC, what does that look like when you translate over to the Big 12? And all of a sudden you have to play Kansas, right? And you still don't get away from Houston because they came with you. Those types of deals are what makes me a little bit bearish on the Knights' potential here. And also, I mean, you said they're very old, but I also just worry that they don't have a guy, right? Shamari Allen was really good at Missouri, Kansas City, but I don't know if a UMKC transfer being your number one option in the Big 12 is necessarily your best bet.
Yeah. And I wrote this article, and I believe I had him on the bench projected wise.
Looks like you have him as the starting shooting guard.
I did. Okay. So I had
Sellers on the bench.
Sellers on the bench. That's my breakout candidate. And same thing. The question about him is, can he be a shooting specialist off the bench and be a really good 3-point shooter, come in to provide that spark, or can he be one of the primary scorers on the team? That's a question we'll have to wait and see to be answered. Darius Johnson is a guy that will be the point guard most likely. They're going to need him to break out. And a guy they actually added a couple days ago, you wrote this down on the bottom here, is DeMar Langford, who we saw him in the ACC. He, I feel like, balances the offense in a way that they did not exactly have last year. It was a lot of an outside jump shooting team. They were not good driving to the rim. And Langford is a 6'5" wing, but even in the ACC, he was really good at the dribble drive. Has the pull-up mid-range element as part of his game, but also could get to the rim, could post up a little bit, or actually posted up a lot. And that's definitely going to help, like I said, for their balance on the offensive end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really solid pickup late in the offseason for UCF. Langford as a wing connector. I think this team really needed something like that because they didn't really, frankly, have it. So I'm glad to see that be improved a little bit for Johnny Dawkins and this team. All right, and to round it off, Dan, who do we have at 91?
91, we have Grand Canyon. What's the nickname of Grand Canyon again?
The Antelopes.
Antelopes. I thought so. Okay.
Yeah.
The Grand Canyon, They have Bryce Drew as their head coach. He brought them to the tournament in 2 of the first 3 years of his tenure, and he was the 14 and the 15 seeds respectively in those 2 tournament appearances. But hey, Grand Canyon projected to win the WAC again, our only WAC team in the top 100 here at the CBB Review rankings. And this is a team that puts up a lot of points. They have returners that have put up a lot of points, as you could see on the screen if you are watching on YouTube. And they finished last year top 20 in 3-point percentage. I expect similar trends for the Antelopes this coming year.
Absolutely. And first of all, huge shout out to Bryce Drew and the entire staff for keeping Rayshon Harrison at Grand Canyon. He was getting high majors coming in from all over the country, trying to nab him as a guard who can really just put the ball in the bucket, for lack of a better term, right? But he stays with the Antelopes here, and it's a really just, I think that makes this team so dangerous in the WAC, right? Where New Mexico State is not the power that they were anymore, where like who is going to fill that void? And I think Grand Canyon has a great chance to do that this year.
For sure. I think getting Harrison to stay is just key. That's more than any recruiting win you could have. That's kind of underestimated by a lot of coaches, but just so many returners. I really like Gabe McLaughlin, who scored 13 points per game, and he was another guy I felt like might have transferred up, but I guess it made a little more sense. He would have been more undersized big. We've seen it before, but that's some big wins right there. Overall, I think this is a really good team. I think they have the versatility, offensively at least. They will probably score even more than they did last year. The big question with Grand Canyon, though, is can they defend better? And a lot of the reasons why they were so poor with their defensive numbers was on the glass. They were one of the worst rebounding teams in the nation, which is actually kind of funny because when they made their tournament run in 2021, they were one of the best rebounding teams. So we've seen it with Bryce Drew. We've seen him be able to produce teams that could rebound the ball, but that's going to be one key statistic I'll be looking at for the Antelopes.
Absolutely. And one thing to note here, they don't have a ton of front court depth, but one transfer I want to keep an eye on is Duke Brennan. He comes over as an in-state transfer from Arizona State. I didn't play super high minutes during his time in Tempe, but what he did do really well was he rebounded the ball offensively in particular, and he also had a pretty high block percentage. So if you're looking for ways to shore up your defense, I feel like that's a pretty solid addition to help out McLaughlin in the front court.
Yep, and that will do it for our episode of the CBB Review Studio podcast. We've got 91 days as of Monday, August 7th, until the college basketball season tips off, and we will continue to count down. Next episode will be in 5 days with 90 through 86. If you have found this show on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., and you have not subscribed yet, please knock that out while you're here. Would really appreciate that. We're trying to increase those numbers, so thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.